I have reached out to the mods with evidence to verify this story. I just have to send them this link after posting, so it may take a little bit to get it verified. I'm noting this because I know this story seems completely ridiculous, but the girl I experienced this with is actually insane. Also using a throwaway, because I don't want people trying to figure out who I am. A lot of people may have heard about this girl. She was all over the news after she stalked a guy, bombarded him with 65,000 texts, and broke into his house, all over one date. We met shortly after she went on that date with him, and we were friends for a while before she broke into his house. At first she seemed like a nice, albeit quirky person. I met her when I spent a couple of months visiting the west coast of the US in summer of 2017. I thought she was cute and we spent a lot of time together. We were living next door to each other for a few weeks, and we were never really more than friends. I stopped having any sort of non-platonic feelings after she started to talk a lot about a guy she had met on some dating website. Apparently he was her soulmate, and she had somehow been guided to him by following her birth calendar. I would only later come to know that they had only been on one date, and he never spoke to her again. I thought it was weird, but I enjoyed our conversations for the most part, and she was funny and nice, so we remained friends. Eventually she moved on to short flings with a guy, and then another girl from Tinder. All the while still talking to me about this guy that she was going to marry, saying that she liked how jealous he got when she would tell him about hooking up with other people. A couple of weeks later, she started to get really erratic. I confronted her a few times about how she was acting, and she told me that she had recently stopped taking her meds, but would start taking them again. She came home one day and decided to tell me that she had a court date coming up for a DUI. I have no idea if this is actually true, but if there's a way to find that out. It happened in Arizona, and her name is pretty easy to find, so someone could look that up if they wanted to know. Her plan was instead to leave the country and go to South America. I told her what a dumb idea that was, and even though she actually went all the way to the airport in a different city, she wound up coming back. Apparently her soulmate was no longer answering her texts, and she took that as a sign that she should drag her ass back to where he was and fix their relationship. She was upset that he may be seeing other people, even though it seemed okay to her that she was seeing other people. Later on, she told me she had texted him and said if he blocked her, she would know that meant he wanted her to come find him. Obviously, he blocked her. Obviously, that didn't go over well with her. So she moved a couple of days later, and the summer was ending, and I moved back to the East Coast. I didn't hear from her for a little while, but then we started talking again through text and WhatsApp. She seemed like she was doing better. She told me she had found a roommate and was working on her art again and generally seemed like she was in a better place. I was happy to have my friend back and healthy, but that didn't last longer than a couple of months. Eventually, her behavior started to seem erratic again. She was sending dozens of texts at a time, and they were all over the place. Several of them had to do with her soulmate and how she was still following him even though he had called the police and blocked her. I told her to stop, tried to get her to take her meds, and tried to reason with her 100 times. I was on the opposite side of the country and had no way of getting in touch with her family, who I never knew much about, or friends to try to get them to help her. She was a kind person and a good friend when she was taking care of her mental health, and I cared about her, but I couldn't force her to take care of herself. One day I set aside some time to call her, and I told her that she was overwhelming me and that she really needed to reach out to her family or someone who could help her. She told me I couldn't do that because she needed to stay with me or she would have to go back to her ex-husband. I don't think any of this is true, but she thought her ex-husband was going to have her killed or followed, that he had the entire police force in his pocket and had paid off her family to give him intel on her whereabouts and what was going on in her life. I had just moved for a job, and I lived in a small studio in a big city. I had no room for anyone to stay long term, and I wasn't about to do that anyways since she was starting to scare me at this point. She asked me if I was still living at my address, which really freaked me out because I had never given her my address or put it anywhere online, and she wouldn't tell me how she got it. I asked her to leave me alone and told her we couldn't be friends anymore unless she took some steps to get better. She obviously didn't take this well. Though I hated my tiny cramped apartment, the reason I was drawn to it was because it had great security. It was actually on the upper floors of a hotel, although the hotel rooms were much nicer than the residence, and no one was allowed through to the residence elevators unless the resident had given their name to security ahead of time and the guest had to show ID. After what happened next, I loved my cramped little apartment because the staff kept me safe. It had been over a week since I had talked to her because I blocked her number and blocked her on WhatsApp. She tried texting me from 4 different phone numbers, using text-free, etc., but I just blocked them all and never responded. I was walking home from work one day, and I was sure I saw her across the street from my building, but it was storming out, and I didn't get a good view. I rushed upstairs and calmed myself down in my apartment. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It's a big city. Lots of people have brown hair and glasses. I'm just worried about her. But then the phone rang. The desk was calling to see if I had forgotten to let them know I had a visitor. My heart sank. I asked them who was waiting. They said they tried to ask her for her name or ID, but she just walked out, and I knew it was her from the way they described her. I texted a mutual friend from over the summer. I wasn't really close with him, so we hadn't stayed in touch, but he told me she had lost it and that he had blocked her too. Apparently she had gone back on the dating site she met her quote, soulmate on, and found someone who looked just like him in my city. She was convinced it was him and had come to find him. This was a very touristy city, but there was just no way this guy had coincidentally come out here. I was sure she had gone bonkers, and I knew she was well aware of where that guy actually lived. I took a page out of her book and used a text-free number to text her that she should leave me alone and I would call the cops if she ever came near me or my building again. In retrospect, I shouldn't have contacted her at all, but I was emotional and not using my better judgment. She said she just wanted to know if I could help her find something. She texted me back really fucking fast and didn't even try to hide it. Then I deleted the text-free app so she couldn't reach me again. I lived in a very crowded area, and I knew she couldn't get into my building, but I was still scared whenever I tried to take public transit alone at night, or was walking through less crowded areas to get home. I had a friend who used to work for the police, but not in this city or at the time this all happened, and she would drive or walk me home from work whenever she could for a while. She told me I should go ahead and report it, even though they really couldn't do anything since she hadn't hurt me and nothing really happened. But I was embarrassed, and again, I didn't use my better judgment. I felt like it was my fault for engaging with her for so long. I knew she was mentally unstable, and I would still try to be her friend and help her. Maybe I gave her the wrong idea that I could do more for her. I ended up moving to a new city for another job after that and didn't hear from her again. I later found out the reason why was that a couple months later she had once again gone back to Arizona and had been arrested for breaking into her quote soulmate's house and using his bathtub. They found a large knife in her car. I didn't want to go into much detail about her stalking of that guy and what she said about him in our text because I wanted to try to focus more on my personal experience with her instead of his. But I could answer some of the questions in the comments if anyone has any.